Hi guys, yesterday I had some work to do, so we made a video instead. Today I still have work to do, so let's make another video. Yesterday's was on defensive technique, so today's will be on attacking technique. And the full database is up on Google Cloud and the address is in the comments section. So the first thing to do is to talk about the general strategy of this endgame. White is trying to push black out of the center toward the edge of the board and then confine black in a corner of the board. So your pieces are operating like sheepdogs, trying to corral a herd of cattle into a corner of the board where you can restrict the king's movement until the rook has to go to the other edge of the board where it's easy prey for a fork. So that's the general strategy, and keep that in mind through everything that you do. First general pointer is that whenever you can form a rosette, usually it's the best thing to do. So that's a reasonable way to play. And a reasonable way to respond for the defender is to go ahead and use your rook to attack whatever piece you can conveniently attack. A reasonable way to play from here would be give that check, step forward, close up the Urva position. Both people have played reasonably well at this point. But there are two times you don't want to close up a rosette if you're the attacker. Here's the first one. In this case, if you close the rosette, notice that you're leaving the entire right-hand side of the board open. The defender always wants to try to move toward the center. You just let him out of the bag. He's going to go here, and you give a check, pinning his king to the rook to reduce his movement. He steps back, and well, your king is totally out of position. You got a long way to go here. The first thing you do is get your queen and king on opposite sides so that they're not interfering with each other, but you still have 25 moves to go toward mate. A much better way to play this kind of position, there are a couple of options. The best, of course, is to give the check where you're also attacking the rook, so the king has to close ranks, and then you go here and you have an absolute seventh position. Just to briefly review what's in the absolute seventh videos, he has to go to a distant defense, and then you follow your general strategy. Take control of that checking square. Controlling checking squares is more important than checking the opposing king. So he gives the check, you step forward, and well, now he's got to move with his king, and the only thing he has to do is walk straight into the fork. Okay. The other reasonable way you can handle this, you can go ahead and give this check because you're holding on to potential forking squares. You're just trying to walk in toward the king. Now you've got two forking squares. He can't go to the F file and he can't go to the second rank unless, of course, he controls your forking square. Keep closing in with your queen. You've got a forking square on the E file. He can't go to the E file. He steps over here, and now is where you use your library of positions. The purpose of my database was not to find the shortest path to mate. In order to do that, you'd have to memorize the table bases. The purpose was to give you a library of positions and a set of simple techniques so that you always have a good idea what to do. In something like this, you always want to skewer the rook because it reduces your opponent's maneuverability. So he steps down there, you give that check, you're still skewering the rook, he can't detach from it, skewer him again, trapezoid position. There's another video up that shows how to use this to win. By contrast, this is a good rosette. If you see the difference, now when you close up, he's confined in the corner of the board. All he can do is send his, please note that the king is paralyzed. King D1 doesn't drop the rook, it drops the game. Queen B1 is mate. So he has no choice but to send his rook over to the other side of the board. Once again, it's going to be easy prey. Check from the diagonal next to the diagonal of the rook. Stay on that diagonal. When he hides in the shadow of your king, set up the diagonal position. The only thing to do here is block that check. Okay, now he has to fall back here, move your king, discovered check. We're in the corner of the board. He moves his king, Philidor position. Okay, and here's another good rosette to close up. I'm going to flip back to the previous one, if I can. Well, I shouldn't have done that, should I? Okay, there's one. And there's the other. Okay, notice all I did was flip where the two black pieces were. Again, you want to close up the rosette here. The black pieces are confined in the corner. the normal way to play this, what the table bases will probably do, is play there, give the check, close up the Erva position. And you've seen this before. A rook in the corner is easy prey. Check from here, check from there, rook's gone. Now let's say you're the defender. If you're trapped in this kind of a rosette, you may as well try to be crafty and wrong foot your opponent. Go ahead and play a harassment defense. Remember, these are really easy to misplay. The whole point is that if you're attacking here, as soon as you see a rook hiding in your king's shadow, you know this is not about checking the opposing king. Your goal is to grab control of that rook's checking squares. So where does your king want to be? C2. What's the checking square? F2. Queen C5 takes control of that checking square. Well, now he doesn't have a whole lot of options. If he plays the check, okay, he's facing mate. Even if he goes king A3, it's still mate on A5. So the best thing he can do here is actually sack the rook. And the other check from here isn't any better. Once again, you go there, and his best move is to sacrifice the rook. Okay, let's say that he moves his king now. Okay, keep in mind, this is not, his rook's still in your shadow. This is about controlling the checking squares. So go ahead and bring your king there. He has no rook checks, and his king and rook are wide open for forks. Let me just show you some of the things here. We go king A4, rook is gone. We go king B2, rook is gone. We go rook B1, rook is gone. We go rook F4, rook is gone. See, there is no safe place on the F file. There's no safe place on the first rank. He's just plain lost. And now, here's the other bad rosette to form. Don't ever form this one. What I want you to notice is that the attacking king is not controlling any of the three squares in front of the defending king. The attacking king is sitting over here on B4. If the attacking king were on D3, this is the rosette you want to form up because the rook has no checks. But if you form the rosette here, you discover to your horror you just walked into a perpetual check. See, there's nowhere for your king to go but to the D file, and there's an immediate pin. So that's the other bad rosette never to form. Okay, and now to continue on with attacking technique, here's a type of position I haven't presented in video before. I call this the body check position. I think Karsten Müller was the first one to talk about kings in opposition giving each other a body check. Well, this is definitely a body check position. The two armies are just glaring at each other across the fourth rank. Now, if we use our skills from the defense video to estimate how far from mate are we would think white's actually in a bad position here. White has only 3 ranks and black has 4. But the power of the queen is the power to use a diagonal move to pivot a position 90 degrees. So in fact, it's not that bad. In the body check in position, there are 2 standard ways for the attacker to handle the position, and one of them is to pivot the position 90 degrees like this into an Erva position. All at once, it no longer is about pushing black all the way up to the 8th rank, it's about pushing black toward the A file. And white is actually in a much better position than you might think. The other general strategy is to give this check. And then there's a couple of ways it can go from there, and I'll show you both of those. You may be tempted to play queen d4 check. You can do that if you want to. You'll get king c6, and then I wasn't able to find any handy ways of playing the position that were easy to understand and memorable. It's much better to do either queen f6 or give this check from the side, and then depending on what he does, you determine what you're going to do. Okay, let's take queen f6 a little bit further. Okay, a good thing to do for a defender, drop back, use your rook to attack whatever piece you can. You can't attack the king, may as well attack the queen. Okay, so we get that check, we walk forward, and it would be natural and reasonable for black to form the body check position again with rook d6. let's take a few additional options this time through. Let's just walk the king straight back. Okay, so we give a check there. We're keeping we're herding black toward the A8 square. We're keeping our pieces like a couple of sheepdogs trying to push the opposing forces in that direction. Okay, skewer the rook. It forces the king to concede ground. Give that check. Erva position again. Okay, something new here. I don't know that that's the best move for a defender, but sometimes if you're getting pushed back, you just throw out something weird and hope it wrong foots him. Okay, check from here. Steps back there. Whenever you get a position like this with the king in front of its own rook, it's safe to walk into the discovered check. He can't move his king out, give check, and simultaneously attack your queen. So it's always safe to do that. And whichever direction he goes with his king, follow him. Okay, he goes back here. Now let's go ahead and bring our queen in, and whichever way he goes with the king, follow. Give the check there. He walks into the corner, close up the diamond. He can't give the check from D8, and now he's in a desperate position. He has to send his rook to the other corner of the board, or down to C1. We'll look at that in a minute. Okay, this is worth understanding. A rook in the corner is a large target. It's almost always possible to do pendulum checks that end up capturing that rook. And this is no exception. So you give a check there. He walks to the B file. Give a check on the B file. Push him back to the A. Give a check there. And give the check there, and you fork the rook. The rook is an easy target in the corner. And note if we go back here, if he goes to C8, well, you give the fork immediately from C3. Similarly, if he sends his rook away that way, you do pendulum checks. And there you are. So rooks in the corner are juicy targets that it's easy to get hold of by using pendulum checks. And now let's look at the body check position handled the other way. So we give the check there. In this specific position, black wants to keep his king on the central squares, so it would make sense for him to go there. In this case, he's just one move away from putting his other piece into the 4 central squares, and that can be a bugger to evict him from. So it's a good idea to keep giving checks and get your pieces on opposite sides of him so that you can converge and keep him from getting the rook into the center. Okay, form the rosette. You just kept him from getting both pieces into the center. Now if you're the defender, it makes sense to use your rook to attack one of the white pieces. So we go there. Can't hurt to pin the rook, reduces his mobility. And now I'm going to go that way. You're thinking, why doesn't he play king e5 and go into the center? Okay, I'll show you that in a minute. The point is here, you do not want to play king e4 because he just plays rook e5 check and puts you on d4 anyway, so go there right away. Okay, now a reasonable plan for the defender here would be to go over here and start playing for a cutoff defense. Okay, so we get a check there so that the queen can now go either to h6 or d6. So we go there, there we are, and now we have a cutoff defense. It's a 3rd rank defense on the 4th rank. Go to the other side with your rook, put the kings in opposition, and now he can go down to h1 and play a harassment defense, or he can go there playing it as a 3rd rank defense, and then you cross the T and kill it that way. Okay, so now I was going to show you what happens on king e5. Well, again, you want to get pieces out of the center whenever you can, so it's natural to go there. And now we come up, in addition to the body check, the second new position I want to show you, I call the wedge position. Now in this case, we have the defender on the move. The queen and rook are always going to be touching in the wedge position. Okay, when you're the defender, you play this as a cutoff defense. It's a 3rd rank kind of defense. It may turn into a distant defense depending on how the attacker goes with it. So if he checks here, in this case, e7 is mined because there's a fork on c5, so you're better off playing it as a distant defense. So let's go ahead and take control of the checking square, a5, so that the king can go to e5 next move. And at this point, there's no point in upholding the distant defense. Go ahead and get your pieces back together, and we're in an Irva position. Okay, and since I showed you that the defender wants to play a wedge position as a cutoff defense, now I may as well show you how an attacker plays it. When you're on the attack, you want to shoot the queen along the black pieces like that, threatening king e5, giving you the absolute 7th extension and a quick march to the 8th rank. Black's best thing to do is to maintain the cutoff on the d file and simply fall back and gain maneuverability in both directions. The black king was cutting off the rook's motion, now the rook is free to move. Okay, whenever the pieces are on a diagonal, one reasonable thing to do as an attacker is skewer the king to the rook so that it has limited movement. If he falls back, we're in the trapezoid position. Black has to give a concession. So we go here. Another rule of thumb for the attacker is it's usually good to attack a hanging rook because it limits his options. So he brings his pieces back together. Go ahead and step in. You know you're going to get a check, but now we have a cage position. And then black falls back here. This is the first example we've seen of something I call the boomerang position, where the pieces are in this sort of open curve formation. This is the first second rank fortress. I don't know if I'm going to put up a video on the second rank fortress. It's by far the most complicated and fascinating aspect of this ending that I discovered. Okay, so the main thing we've done is given general attacking principles. We've talked about the rosettes you don't want to form. We've given general guidance on the body check position, and we've introduced you to the wedge position. And our final bit of business that I forgot to put in is the other reaction in the original body check position. We have queen h7 as one way to play it, like so. And we have this check, queen d4 check. And the other natural reaction other than king g6, in this case king g6 is helping the attacker. It's walking into the corner. So the other natural defensive reaction is to go here. I call this the wishbone position, and that's the third and final new position. It's easily dispensed with. The attacker always turns a wishbone into a thorn. Now if you look at the thorn position, so wishbone, thorn, turn the wishbone into a thorn. If you look at that, all it is a Philidor position that happens not to be in the corner of the board. The reason that the Philidor position is so devastating for the defender is because the best defense to the thorn position is to form the rosette. And when you're against the corner of the board, you can't form the rosette, so it's quick loss. Okay, that's enough on attacking play. Hope you enjoyed it.